Millionaire marries a fake bride for his dying mother, but the rule she set turns real. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain was falling softly over downtown Seattle, washing the city in silver light. Inside Street Clare Hospital, Adrian Hale stood beside his mother's bed, his usually steady hands trembling slightly. Machines beeped in slow rhythm, each sound reminding him how fragile time had become. His mother's once strong voice was barely a whisper now. "Adrian," she said, eyes fluttering open. "Promise me, I will see you get married before I go." He froze. For years, Adrian had built walls around his heart, walls made of marble boardrooms, contracts, and silence. Love had no place in his world, and marriage was just another deal people used to gain something. But this was his mother's dying wish. He clasped her frail hand and forced a smile. "I promise, Mom." That night, as rain streaked across the hospital windows, Adrian's reflection stared back at him. Expensive suit, perfect tie, and eyes that betrayed exhaustion. A man who had everything but could not give his mother the only thing she wanted. Hours later, he was sitting alone in his black Range Rover, the glow of city lights reflected on the windshield. He scrolled through his contacts, every name a reminder of how empty his connections were. He did not need a wife. He needed a solution. And like every problem in his life, Adrian intended to solve this one with logic and money. The next morning, his lawyer slid a folder across his mahogany desk. "Find someone suitable, discreet, and fast," Adrian said flatly. His assistant hesitated. "You mean a fake marriage?" Adrian nodded once. 6 weeks, enough for my mother to believe it is real." That was when Lila Moore entered the story. Lila was 27, a part-time art teacher barely keeping up with rent. Her younger brother, Ethan, was waiting for heart surgery that she could not afford. The hospital bills were suffocating, and her dream of opening a small art studio had been buried beneath a mountain of debt. When she received a mysterious call asking her to come to Hale Industries headquarters, she almost deleted it, assuming it was a scam. But something in the woman's voice, urgent yet polite, made her go. Now, she sat across from Adrian in a quiet cafe near the waterfront. The place smelled of roasted coffee and sea air. He looked immaculate, a man built from precision gray suit, sharp jawline, eyes the color of storm clouds. He slid a thin envelope across the table. "Miss Moore," he began, his voice calm but distant, "I am offering you a contract marriage. You will be my wife for 6 weeks. You will attend family dinners, public events, and appear by my side whenever necessary. In return, you will receive $500,000. Lila blinked, her mouth slightly open. "Excuse me? You are serious?" "Completely." She laughed once, a nervous, incredulous sound. "You are out of your mind." Adrian leaned back, unshaken. "Perhaps, but I am also out of time." For a moment, silence filled the air except for the faint hiss of rain against the windows. Lila looked down at the contract, her reflection rippling on the glossy table. $500,000. Enough to save Ethan, enough to breathe again. But at what cost? She flipped to the last page and saw a line that made her heart pause. Clause 5. Emotional boundaries. No romantic involvement, no personal attachment, no physical intimacy. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and she took the pen. "One condition," she said softly, writing beneath his typed words. "Rule Hasson. No falling in love." Adrian raised a brow, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You think that will be a problem?" "For me, no," she said, her tone steady. "For you, maybe." He looked at her for a long moment before signing his name with a single stroke. Outside, the rain began to ease, and sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the wet streets. Inside that small cafe, 2 strangers sealed a deal that would soon blur every line between business and fate. As Adrian folded the contract, his phone buzzed a message from the hospital. His mother had woken briefly, asking when she could meet his wife. He looked up at Lila, who was staring at the rain as if searching for answers she could not afford to ask. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, you meet my mother." She turned to him, unsure whether to feel fear or pity. And what do I tell her? Adrian's eyes softened just a little. Tell her you are the woman who saved me. He did not realize yet how true that line would become. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of Adrian Hale's office. The skyline of Seattle stretched behind him, cold and perfect, a mirror of the man himself. On his desk lay the signed contract, the one that had turned a desperate art teacher into his future wife. He turned the pages slowly, stopping where her handwritten note stood out in blue ink. Rule Hasson, no falling in love. For a man who built his life on control, it was almost amusing. Still, something about her quiet defiance lingered in his mind longer than it should have. Everything is arranged, his assistant said, standing at the door. Your mother's condition remains stable. She asked if she could meet your wife today. Adrian nodded once. This evening. Prepare the car. Across town, Lila Moore sat at her small kitchen table, a duffel bag half-packed beside her. Her brother Ethan was sketching superheroes on an old notepad, humming to himself. She watched him for a long moment before speaking. Hey, buddy, remember when I said I might get a better job soon? He looked up, smiling. You mean your art school? She forced a smile. Something like that. She did not tell him about the contract. She did not tell him about the lie she was about to live. All he needed to know was that everything would be fine, that he would get his surgery, that they would have a future. By late afternoon, a driver arrived. The car felt too expensive, the seat too soft. She traced the hem of her borrowed dress, trying not to wrinkle it. Through the tinted window, the city turned into sprawling estates and waterfront mansions. Each passing minute made the truth heavier. When they stopped, Adrian was waiting at the entrance of an elegant stone house draped in ivy. He looked different in daylight, less like a stranger, more like a story she was still trying to read. You are on time, he said simply. I figured fake wives should at least be punctual, she replied. A shadow of amusement crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. He offered his arm, formal and distant. Ready? She nodded, even though she was not. Inside, the marble foyer reflected soft, golden light. A nurse hurried past, and Lila's eyes caught a glimpse of the woman who lay beyond the corridor, Adrian's mother. Her presence filled the house even before Lila met her. She knows you are coming, Adrian said quietly. Just follow my lead. Lila took a deep breath. Her heart pounded loud enough to drown out the ticking of the grand clock. Every step echoed across the floor as they approached the room. When they entered, the older woman turned from the window. Her eyes lit up. Adrian, she whispered. And this must be her. Lila forced a smile, her palms sweating. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hale. Please, the woman said, her voice thin but warm. Call me Margaret. Come closer, dear. Adrian stood behind her, his hands folded, the perfect son performing the perfect act. But when Lila knelt beside his mother's chair and saw the gratitude in the woman's eyes, the act began to feel real. For the first time that day, she forgot the money, the rule, and the fear. She just wanted this fragile woman to smile. Margaret took her hand. You are beautiful, she said softly. Thank you for making my boy happy. Lila glanced up at Adrian. He did not correct his mother. He only looked down at Lila with an expression she could not name, something softer than control, something dangerously close to human. Dinner that evening felt like a scene from someone else's life. The dining table stretched longer than the hallway of Lila's apartment, covered in silverware and crystal that sparkled under soft chandelier light. Margaret Hale sat at the head, her frail figure wrapped in a shawl, smiling as if the simple act of seeing her son and his wife together gave her strength. Lila tried to remember which fork to use. Every move felt mechanical, careful, rehearsed. She had never eaten food that came in more than one course. Across from her, Adrian carved his steak with effortless precision, the embodiment of calm. Tell me, Lila, Margaret said gently, how did you and Adrian meet? Lila froze. She had rehearsed a story in the car, but the question still sent panic through her chest. At an art exhibit, she managed, forcing a smile. He bought one of my paintings by mistake. Adrian looked up, surprised, then played along. It was a terrible investment, he said dryly. Margaret laughed softly. Oh, I do not believe that. I can tell you both bring light to each other. Lila felt her throat tighten. It was a harmless lie, yet the way Margaret looked at her with pure affection made her wish it were true. After dinner, Margaret insisted on taking a short walk in the garden. Adrian pushed her wheelchair along the stone path lined with roses. Lila walked beside them, holding a lantern the maid had given her. The night air was cool and smelled of rain and jasmine. Margaret looked up at the stars. "When Adrian's father died, he built this house to keep me close," she said softly. "But somewhere along the way, he built walls instead of bridges." Adrian's grip on the wheelchair tightened. "Mother," she smiled knowingly. "Do not scold me, darling. You know I only want you to live before I leave." Lila walked a few steps behind them, listening. The tenderness between mother and son was raw, fragile, and real. It reminded her of nights when she used to stay up drawing by candlelight while her brother coughed in the next room. Love, she realized, was the one thing wealth could not counterfeit. Back inside, Margaret began to tire. A nurse helped her to her room, leaving Lila and Adrian alone in the dimly lit hallway. The silence stretched between them. "You handled yourself well," Adrian said finally. "She is lovely," Lila replied quietly. "You are lucky to have her." His expression shifted, something unguarded passing through his eyes. "I know." They walked toward the staircase. Lila hesitated at the first step. "So, what happens now?" Adrian turned slightly, his tone even. "Now, we continue to make it believable. Tomorrow, there is a family dinner with the board members. You will come as my wife." "More acting," she said under her breath. "Exactly," he replied. Then, after a pause, "Good night, Lila." She watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. For the first time, she wondered who the real Adrian Hale was, the man who hired her, or the son who smiled for his mother's sake. When she finally entered the guest room prepared for her, a small envelope rested on the pillow. Inside was a note written in Adrian's precise handwriting. "Thank you for today. You made her happy." Lila sat on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in her hand. The contract had begun as a transaction, a lifeline for both of them. But tonight, under this roof filled with ghosts and unspoken truths, she realized that the line between real and pretend was already starting to blur. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall curtains of the guest room. Lila woke to the distant sound of footsteps and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the details returned, the silk sheets, the quiet servants, and the weight of a contract that had turned her life upside down. She got dressed and followed the sound of voices to the main living room. Adrian was already there, speaking with his assistant about an upcoming board meeting. His crisp tone carried authority, the kind that made people listen without question. When he noticed her, his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," he said. She blinked. "Do I have to get used to that?" He gave a small smile. "Only when people are watching." Breakfast was a strange mix of silence and nerves. Margaret joined them briefly, her energy weaker than the night before, but her spirit unbroken. "I want to host a dinner this Friday," she announced. "It has been too long since this house had laughter." Adrian frowned slightly. "Mother, the doctors said—" She raised a hand. "I said laughter, not stress. Let me have this." Lila reached out and touched Margaret's arm gently. "We will make it special, I promise." The older woman's eyes warmed. "You remind me of your mother," she said softly. "You have the same kindness in your face." After breakfast, the mansion transformed into quiet preparation. Designers came to measure the dining hall. Florists carried bouquets through the corridors. Lila found herself swept into the rhythm of it all, choosing fabrics, arranging flowers, tasting desserts. The staff, initially distant, began to treat her with cautious affection. Late in the afternoon, she found herself alone in the library, running her fingers along the rows of leather-bound books. She pulled one from the shelf and froze. Inside the cover was a small photograph Adrian as a boy, sitting beside his father, both smiling at the camera. The resemblance was striking, but what caught her attention was how carefree he looked. "Found something interesting?" His voice came from behind her, low and measured. She turned, startled, the photograph still in her hand. "I did not mean to pry." He walked closer, his expression unreadable. "It is fine. That was before my father passed. He used to bring me here to read while he worked." There was a pause. "You looked happy," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Happiness is easy when you do not understand loss." The way he said it made her chest tighten. For a moment, she saw not the billionaire who had hired her, but a man who had been lonely for far too long. Before she could reply, his phone buzzed. he answered quickly, his tone shifting back to the distant CEO. Yes, confirm the dinner list, and make sure the board members know my wife will be attending. When he hung up, he turned to her again. You did well with my mother, he said. She trusts you. Lila looked down. I did not do it for her trust. I did it because she is kind. Oh. Adrian studied her for a moment, then said quietly, kindness is rare. Do not lose it in this house. That night, as Lila prepared for bed, she replayed his words in her head. For the first time since signing the contract, she realized that Adrian Hale was not just a man trapped in obligation, he was a man afraid to feel anything real. And somehow, that fear made her want to understand him even more. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, Adrian's footsteps echoed once before, fading into silence. Friday evening arrived with the scent of rain and candlelight. The Hale mansion glowed from within, its windows spilling warm light onto the wet garden paths. Dozens of guests filled the grand hall, executives, old family friends, and board members dressed in tailored suits. Cameras flashed, laughter rose, and beneath the glitter, every smile hid a layer of judgment. Lila stood at the top of the staircase in a navy gown chosen by Margaret. Her heart thudded like a drum. She had never attended anything like this in her life. The chandelier sparkled above her as Adrian extended his arm. Ready? He asked quietly. She took a deep breath. I hope I do not embarrass you. You will not, he said, his tone firm but almost kind. Just be yourself. They descended together, every eye following them. For the first few minutes, everything went as planned, small talk, polite smiles, the illusion of a perfect marriage. But then came the first test. One of Adrian's oldest business rivals, a silver-haired man named Richard Lowell, approached with a glass of champagne and a smirk. Adrian, he said loudly, I see you finally settled down. Surprising considering your reputation. Adrian's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Richard turned to Lila. Tell me, Mrs. Hale, how does it feel to be married to one of the most powerful men in Seattle? I imagine it must be quite the adjustment from your background. Lila felt the heat rise in her chest. She could feel Adrian tense beside her, ready to step in, but she met Richard's gaze and smiled politely. It is an adjustment, she said calmly, but power means very little if it is not used to make people's lives better. Adrian reminds me of that every day. For a moment, silence fell. Then someone nearby began to applaud softly. The tension broke, replaced by polite laughter. Richard lifted his glass. Well said. As he walked away, Adrian looked at her with quiet surprise. You did not need to defend me. She shrugged lightly. I was not defending you. I was defending the person you are trying to be. Later that night, Margaret joined them near the fireplace. Her cheeks were flushed with happiness, her eyes bright despite her frailty. You two looked wonderful together, she said. Adrian, I have not seen you smile that way in years. He chuckled softly. It must be the company. Lila felt her heart stir at the rare warmth in his voice. As the guests began to leave, Adrian walked her out to the terrace overlooking the lake. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and fragrant. For the first time that night, they were alone. You handled yourself better than I expected, he said. She laughed quietly. I will take that as a compliment. He looked out at the water, hands in his pockets. You made my mother proud tonight. That means more than you know. For a moment, neither spoke. The soft hum of crickets filled the silence. Then he said, almost to himself, You are different from anyone I have met. Lila turned to him. Different how? He hesitated. You do not want anything from me. She met his eyes. That is because everything I want cannot be bought. Something flickered in his expression, vulnerability, maybe, or something dangerously close to admiration. Before he could respond, a nurse stepped onto the terrace. Mr. Hale, your mother is asking for you. Adrian straightened immediately. Tell her I will be right there. He turned back to Lila. Good night. As he disappeared down the hall, Lila watched his figure fade into the dim light. The world around her felt suddenly quiet, heavy with things unspoken. She had promised herself not to fall in love, but tonight, that rule no longer felt so simple. That night, the house was silent except for the faint sound of rain against the windows. Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words of the evening replaying in her head. She could still feel the weight of Adrian's gaze on the terrace, the way his tone had softened when he spoke about his mother. Every part of her wanted to keep her distance, but something invisible kept pulling her closer. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky washed clean. Lila found herself in the garden, trimming roses from Margaret's bedside table. The older woman was weaker now, but her mind remained sharp. When Lila entered the room, Margaret smiled faintly. "You have a gentle touch," she said. "Adrian told me you paint. I can see it in the way you handle the flowers." Lila blushed. "I have not painted in months. Life got in the way." Margaret studied her carefully. "Then you must promise me you will paint again. The world needs people who remind us of beauty." Lila nodded. "I promise." Before she could stand, Margaret reached for her hand. "He has changed since you came here. My son has always been strong, but strength without softness turns to stone. You gave him warmth again." Lila swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. "He is a good man, Mrs. Hale. He just does not know how to show it." Later that afternoon, Adrian returned from a meeting downtown. He found Lila in the library again, sorting through a stack of Margaret's old letters. Sunlight spilled across her face as she read one of them aloud, her voice low and soft. "Love," she read, "is not about ownership. It is about presence. That is beautiful." Adrian leaned against the doorway, watching her. "My father wrote that to my mother before their wedding. She used to keep it by her bed." Lila looked up, startled that he had been standing there. They must have loved each other deeply. "They did," he said quietly. "But after he died, she was never the same. I spent years trying to make sure she would never lose anything again. And in the process, I forgot what it meant to live for something other than work." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, he did not sound like a man giving orders or signing deals. He sounded human, wounded, tired, and real. "You do not have to carry everything alone," she said softly. Adrian gave a small, almost sad smile. "That is easy for you to say. You are not the one with an empire to run." "No," she replied, "but I am the one who sees the man behind it." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. Lila's heart pounded as she remembered the rule she had written in blue ink. No falling in love. She turned away quickly, pretending to adjust the papers. He took a step closer. "Lila," he began, but before he could finish, the nurse entered. "Mr. Hale," she said urgently, "your mother is asking for you." Adrian's expression changed instantly, the walls sliding back into place. "Tell her I am coming," he said. When he was gone, Lila stood alone in the quiet room, her pulse still racing. She looked down at the letter in her hand, the one that said love was about presence, not ownership. The edges were worn, the ink faded, yet the message felt alive. She traced the words with her fingertip, whispering to herself, "Rule number 1, you are impossible to keep." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the storm that was beginning to build between them. 2 days later, the illusion began to crack. Margaret's health declined faster than anyone expected, and with it came whispers inside the mansion. Servants spoke in hushed tones, and a few of Adrian's relatives began to visit more often, pretending to care but clearly circling like vultures. Among them was Elaine Carter, Adrian's ambitious cousin and a member of the company's board. Elaine arrived uninvited one morning, her smile polished but cold. "Adrian, I heard about your mother's condition," she said, kissing the air beside his cheek. "How tragic, and who is this?" Her gaze slid toward Lila like a knife. "This is my wife," Adrian said evenly. Elaine's brow lifted. "Your wife? I had no idea you married. How sudden." Lila kept her composure, returning the woman's stare with quiet dignity. "It happened quickly," she said, "but sometimes the right things do." Elaine's smile did not reach her eyes. "Of course. I suppose love does not wait for timing or background checks." The insult was subtle, but it hit its mark. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Elaine, if you are here for business, speak to my assistant. Otherwise, my wife and I have things to attend to." That night, Lila overheard 2 maids whispering in the corridor. "Miss Elaine said Mrs. Hale is just a hired actress. She plans to prove it at the will meeting." The words struck like lightning. Lila stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. She had always known the truth might surface, but not this soon, not like this. Later, when she found Adrian in the study, his expression told her he already knew. A copy of the marriage contract lay open on his desk, its corner marked with Elaine's red lipstick. "She got it," Lila said in a whisper. "She broke into my office," he replied, his voice low with anger. "She plans to expose everything at the board meeting tomorrow. She wants control of the company and my mother's estate." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. "Then fire me. End this now before it gets worse." He looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Do you really think I would let her humiliate you in front of everyone? You are my wife, Lila. At least for now." She shook her head. "This was supposed to be pretend, Adrian. You promised." He stepped closer, his voice rough. "It stopped feeling pretend the moment you walked into that hospital room." Before she could respond, the nurse appeared at the door, pale and trembling. "Mr. Hale, it is your mother." "You need to come. Now." The words froze them both. Without another word, Adrian rushed past her, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Lila stood there in silence, staring at the open contract on the desk. The ink of her own handwriting, Rule Hasson. No falling in love seemed to blur before her eyes as the storm outside began to rage. By the time the storm passed, the house had fallen into a fragile stillness. Hours after the meeting ended, Adrian sat beside his mother's bed, her breathing shallow but peaceful. The nurse adjusted the oxygen line and quietly stepped out, leaving mother and son alone. Margaret's eyes fluttered open when she heard his voice. "You came back," she whispered. "I would never leave you," he said softly, taking her hand. She smiled faintly. "I heard what you said tonight. Your father would have been proud." Adrian swallowed hard. "I just told the truth." "Hub, that is all I ever wanted from you," she murmured. And from her. Her gaze shifted toward the door where Lila stood quietly, hands clasped in front of her. She made this house feel alive again. Lila moved closer, kneeling beside the bed. Margaret reached out and pressed something small into her hand, a thin gold bracelet engraved with a single word. "Grace." "Keep it," Margaret said. "You gave it back to my son." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale." Take care of each other," Margaret whispered, her voice fading like the last light of sunset. That night, as rain returned to the city, Margaret Hale passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small, elegant, and filled with roses from the garden she loved. Adrian stood in silence as the last shovel of earth covered the grave. Lila stayed behind him, silent but steadfast. When it was over, he turned to her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "She believed it was real," he said quietly. "Maybe that is what matters." Lila shook her head. "It was real, Adrian, at least for her, and maybe for us too." In the weeks that followed, the house grew emptier. The contract had expired. Her half of the payment had been sent to her account. She had packed her things and prepared to leave, telling herself it was time. But on her last night, she wandered through the quiet halls one final time, tracing the outlines of the life she had lived by accident. In the library, she found the old letter again, the one Adrian's father had written. "Love is not about ownership, it is about presence." She folded it gently and placed it on the desk beside the marriage contract. Then she walked away. At dawn, the car waited for her outside. Adrian stood by the front door, his expression unreadable. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Back to my brother," she said softly. "He is recovering well. He needs me." He nodded, looking down. "You kept your promise. You gave her peace. And you gave me hope," she said. She reached out to return the gold bracelet, but he closed her hand over it. "Keep it. She wanted you to have it." Lila hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Goodbye, Adrian. Goodbye, Lila." She turned toward the car, the morning light breaking through the clouds. But before she could step inside, Adrian's voice called out behind her. "Rule number 1, he said, his tone softer than the rain. "No falling in love. You broke it." Lila froze. Slowly, she turned back. Adrian stood on the steps, holding a small box in his hand. Inside, a simple gold ring gleamed in the light. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough for her to hear the tremor in his breath. "When I wrote that contract, I thought I could control everything. Business, time, even my heart. But you proved me wrong. You made me want something I cannot buy." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You do not have to say this out of guilt." He shook his head. "I am saying it because for the first time I mean it." He opened the box. No contracts, no conditions, just truth. For a moment neither moved. Then Lila smiled through her tears. You are terrible at keeping promises. Adrian smiled back. Only the ones worth breaking. She took his hand, and for the first time, there was no performance, only presence. The scene faded into sunlight streaming across the lake. The camera of memory lingered on the bracelet glinting at her wrist, the same word engraved in gold. Grace. Voiceover. In the end, their story was never about the contract. It was about two people who pretended long enough to remember how to be real. Love began as an act, but became a promise neither of them would ever break again. And as they stood together by the water, the world that once divided them felt small because sometimes what starts as make-believe ends as the truest thing of all.